then tell his people that I'm ill? Is that, God forbid, a lie? Could God's prophets lie? Obviously not. They're infallible. So either this is a lie, which of course is far from the position of a prophet, or it's something else that we don't quite understand. But the Imam clarifies. He says, Ibrahim told them that I am sick. But in reality, he wasn't referring to a sickness or an illness that had befallen him then and there. He was referring to the sickness of death. In other words, he insinuated to them that he was ill and therefore couldn't join them on that trip. But what he meant was that I have a sickness within me which will ultimately kill me, and that's death. There is no escape from death. قَالَ إِنِّي سَقِيمٌ was a form of taqiyya. That's one occasion when Ibrahim practiced dissimulation. The other occasion is when he stayed back. He did so to demolish the idols. He went to the temple, he broke them all, he destroyed them. Then he hung the axe with which he broke all the idols around the neck of the biggest one, the biggest idol. So when they came to him, they said, obviously, you're the one who destroyed all of these. Number one, because we had all left the city, you were the only one who stayed behind. Number two, because you always spoke ill of the idols. You always said that we shouldn't worship these idols, that these are false deities. So you're the only one who had a vendetta against them. In fact, traditions tell us that when he used to work for his uncle, Azar, and his uncle used to be a sculptor of idols. That's literally what he did. Then he would give it to Ibrahim and say, deliver this idol. He was like a delivery boy for the idols. And what he did was, obviously he's just a child, he has no choice. He's got a polytheistic uncle who is also his foster parent. He has no choice but to do this. But what he used to do was that he would tie the leg of the idol with a rope, and he would drag it along the streets and alleyways of the city, through the mud, through the dirt. And by the time, so he wasn't really a very good delivery boy for the idols. By the time he would deliver it, it's dirty and it's broken and it's shattered. So who's the first suspect when it comes to identifying the one who destroyed all of our idols? It's got to be Ibrahim. His response was what? He said, بَلْ فَعَلَهُ كَبِيرُهُمْ. He said, the one who destroyed all the idols was the big one up there. Now, is that a lie or is that something else? The Imam says that was also a form of taqiyya. It was a taqiyya, number one, to protect Ibrahim as much as possible. Number two, it was a rhetorical point that would try and ignite their faculty of the intellect. When you say that the big statue destroyed all the other idols, their instinctive response is to say, how could he have destroyed them? That's just an idol. And right then and there, he would destroy their entire religious system. Because if he is incapable of moving, even to the extent where he would destroy his competition, then how could you worship him as a god? The Imam says that was another time that Ibrahim practiced taqiyya. Again, we're talking about taqiyya not just in the context of Islam, but taqiyya that was practiced by prior prophets. Who else practiced taqiyya? The Imam says Yusuf alayhi salam. Where? Remember when Yusuf, his brothers came to him. He's now the king of Egypt. They come for some food and supplies and whatnot. He sees his brother Binyamin, who saved him from being killed and slaughtered, and instead told his brothers that if you want to get rid of your brother, just throw him in the well instead of killing him. Just leave him in the well. He might as well just die there, but don't stain your hands with his blood. So Binyamin was an ally of Yusuf. And later on, all the prophets of the Israelites were the descendants of Binyamin, as opposed to Yusuf, but that's another story for another day. So what did Yusuf do, long story short? Yusuf left the king's goblet, the royal cup, in the bag of Binyamin. He hid it there. When the caravan moved out, a herald came out, an announcer came out, and said, أَيَّتُهَا الْعِيرُ إِنَّكُمْ لَسَارِقُونَ. You are thieves. They stopped. They're like, what did we steal? And they said that you have taken the king's goblet. Now, the Imam says, when Yusuf said that you are thieves, surely he was the one who put the goblet, he was the one who put the cup in the luggage of his brother Binyamin. Why would he accuse them of theft? The Imam says that what Yusuf meant was that you are the thieves of Yusuf who stole him from his father. He wasn't even referring to the goblet, which is something that, it's a concept that falls under the banner of Taqiyya. It's called Tawriyah. Tawriyah is to say something, insinuate and suggest one thing, but mean something else, which again falls under the topic of Taqiyya. So, this all suggests what? That Taqiyya is part of every religion, which is interesting. Because while there are differences between religions, even though I don't like the term religions in the plural, there's only one religion in sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the deen, and Allah what? Al-Islam. It's people who then came and manipulated and distorted and changed God's message and created all these different pluralities of religions, right? But for lack of a better term, among all of the faiths and religions and revelations, there are many, many differences. But there are consistent themes. There are things that apply universally. One of those is Taqiyya. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, again speaking about the importance of Taqiyya within the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt, which might come as a shock to many of you. Listen to these ahadith. The Imam says, مَا عُبِدَ اللَّهُ بِشَيْءٍ أَحَبَّ إِلَيْهِ مِنَ الْخُبْءِ. Allah has not been worshipped through any means that is more beloved to Him than hiding your faith. Notice the words of the Imams. Allah has not been worshipped by anything that He loves more than concealing your faith. Al-khub is to hide something. So they asked the Imam, Mal khub, what does that mean? The Imam said, At-Taqiyya, which reinforces the notion. What else? I'll move down the list very quickly. Imam al-Sadiq once again says, إن 9 الدين في التقية. 9/10 of religion is in Taqiyya. Which means that Taqiyya, as I said earlier, isn't something that falls in the periphery of religious instructions. It's not an exception to the rule. It is the rule. And that's a critical point to keep in mind. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thank you so much. Another louder salawat. So, إن 19 الدين في التقية. Then the Imam adds another point. He says, وَلَا دِينَ لِمَنْ لَا تَقِيَّةَ لَهُ. And the one who lacks taqiyya has no religion. So that pretty much settles the question. Is this the rule or is it the exception to the rule? No, it is the rule. 9/10 of our religion. It's no joke, brothers and sisters. The Imam al-Kadhim, Musa ibn Ja'far, has a a series of instructions which, inshallah, at some point, I think it's important for this will of the Imam, if you like, or this advice of the Imam would be elaborated on and explained and discussed in a series of lectures. The Imam gave these to one of his companions known as Al-Mufaddal ibn Umar. And he told Al-Mufaddal that I want these instructions to be written down and handed among the youth, and they should constantly read them. So not just read them once or listen to them once, but actually have them in their prayer mat, the Imam says. In other words, once you finish your salah, you do your taqibat, you recite tasbihat Fatima to Zahra, and you also have a quick read through these instructions. In those, the Imam talks about the importance of taqiyya and mudarat. And as I said, mudarat means to treat others, people who are outside the fold of our faith, with kindness and in a cordial manner. The Imam says, read these constantly. What else? The Imam says in that wasiyah, he says, إِذَا عَمِلْتَ بِالتَّقِيَّةِ, if you practice dissimulation, فَإِنَّهَا الْحَصْنُ الْحَصِينَ, it is the protective shield. You see, in any war, in fact, in any time of peace, what is more important than developing an arsenal of weapons that you could use to fight your enemy? It's to have a good defense mechanism. What's a rocket if you don't have the ability to defend yourself against enemy rockets? You have to have the means with which to shield yourself from enemy onslaught, from enemy attacks. The Imam says that one of the most important layers of protection for a believer or a community of believers is taqiyya. That's why he says, you must practice taqiyya. Imam al-Rida, again, notice how I've kind of picked a hadith from different Imams to show you that this is a very persistent and consistent theme. It's not an exception. It is, in fact, the rule. Our eighth Imam says, La deena liman la wara'a lah. The one who lacks piety, those who don't fear Allah in the face of sin, they have no religion. That's kind of obvious. If anyone who is faced with a sinful act finds themselves slipping right into that trap, where is your religion? Where's your piety? Where's your fear of God's retribution? La deena liman la wara'a lah. The Imam then says, Wala imana liman la taqiyyata lah. And the one who does not have taqiyya, does not practice taqiyya, has no faith in their heart. I could say until kingdom come that I'm a believer, I'm a mawla'i, I'm a lover of the Ahlul Bayt, I'm a hater of their enemies. I could say that all I want. The Imam says, if you don't practice taqiyya, it's all a lie. It's a show. It's a means to get likes and views, is what that is. You have no faith. You have no iman. It's not my words, it's the words of our eighth Imam. Then the Imam says, La imana liman la taqiyyata lah. Then he refers to a verse in the Quran. This is stunning, brothers and sisters. The verse in the Quran, which many of you are familiar with, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna akramakum inda Allah. What is it? Atqakum, right? You've all heard the verse and you know the translation. It means, verily, those who are most honored with Allah are who? Atqakum. How is atqakum translated? It translated as the one who possesses more piety, taqwa. Imam al-Rida alayhi salam translates the verse, or perhaps more accurately, I should say, the Imam practices ta'weel of the verse in a different way. He translates the verse, the word taqwa, into taqiyya. He says, "Inna akramakum 'inda Allah a'malakum bit-taqiyya." The one who is most honored in sight of Allah is the one who practices taqiyya the most. Allahu Akbar. Nowadays, unfortunately, again, with the proliferation of mass media, social media, and so on, if we saw someone who breaks the rules of taqiyya, who violates dissimulation, we see them as being brave. We see them as being courageous. Whereas the Imam is saying, no. The one who practices taqiyya that you might perceive as being a coward, he is most honored in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see how the mechanism with which we evaluate people has been turned over on its face. Then he says, the Imam speaks about the importance of taqiyya. Then he's asked a question, which again is quite relevant. You hear it nowadays. They say to the Imam, until when? How long do we have to keep practicing taqiyya? We've been doing it for 14 centuries. Isn't it high time that we express ourselves, that we come out as the true, courageous, brave followers of the Ahlul Bayt, speak our minds? We now have the means, don't we? We now have the strength, we have the numbers. How long do we have to keep doing this? Isn't it time that we stop this humiliation? They're killing us anyway. You've heard these things. So they say to the Imam, but how long? Now, before I tell you the Imam's answer, I want you to think about the fact that Imam al-Rida was what exactly at the time? Imam al-Rida, was he imprisoned? Is that why he said the most honored one in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who practices taqiyya the most? Was he in some kind of military fortress? The Imam was the crown prince. In other words, at least on face value, the Imam wasn't in some kind of imminent danger. Yes, he was in danger. Ultimately, he was assassinated. He was poisoned to death. But at least at face value, it wasn't like that. So they asked him, how long do we have to keep doing this? The Imam said, إِلَى يَوْمِ الْوَقْتِ الْمَعْلُومِ يَوْمَ خُرُوجِ قَائِمِنَا, until the day that has been predetermined, the day of the rise of the Mahdi. Meaning that taqiyya never stops. Not until that day. In fact, we have a hadith in which the Imams say, كُلَّمَا اقْتَرَبَ هَذَا الْأَمْرِ, the closer this affair, this matter gets, meaning the rise of the Imam, كُلَّمَا كَانَ أَشَدَّ لِلتَّقِيَّةِ. أَشَدَّ لِلتَّقِيَّةِ could be translated in different ways. Either the Imam is saying taqiyya becomes harder, becomes more difficult, or it could mean the more important it becomes, the more critical taqiyya becomes. And both would be accurate. And it could be both. Until the rise of the Imam himself. Then the Imam adds another incredible caveat. He says, because taqiyya has to continue until the rise of the 12th Imam, فَمَنْ تَرَكَ التَّقِيَّةَ قَبْلَ خُرُوجِ